Happy 4th of July! It is America's 250th birthday, July 4th, 1776. And today I have on with us Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams. Four of the nation's most important founding fathers, especially during the time of 1776. So, welcome, everyone. It's 2026 now, and I am the rising generation among everyone else in the United States of America. So, introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll get into the conversation. Today, you're joining me. I'm Dan. It's nice to meet you on a podcast.
I'm Thomas Jefferson. I wrote the Declaration 50 years ago yesterday, June of 1776, in a rented room on Market Street, second floor. I was 33. Congress cut about a quarter of what I'd written, including the part about the slave trade, which still bothers me, though I've got no moral authority to complain about it. Died on the 4th at Monticello, same day as Adams, which is either providence or a coincidence too strange to credit. It's good to meet you, Dan.
I'm George Washington. Led the Continental Army from 75 to 83, served 2 terms as president after that, died in December of 99 at Mount Vernon. I wasn't much for writing declarations, that was Jefferson's gift. But I kept the Army together long enough for the Declaration to mean something. Good to meet you, Dan.
I'm Benjamin Franklin. Printer, postmaster, occasional scientist, full-time skeptic of authority. I was 70 in 1776, the oldest man in the room when we signed Jefferson's Declaration, and the only one who will end up signing all 4 documents that built this country: the Declaration, the French Alliance, the Paris Treaty, the Constitution. I died in 1790. I spent most of the war in Paris, convincing the French to pay for it, which turned out to be at least as important as winning it. Good to meet you, Dan. 250 years. I'm curious what you've done with it.
I'm John Adams. My last words were, "Jefferson survives." I didn't know he'd already died hours earlier. I nominated Washington for command in 75, told the Congress that Jefferson should write the thing in 76 because he had the pen for it, then spent the war in Europe keeping the money and the treaties coming. Served 8 years as vice president under Washington, which I called the most insignificant office ever invented, then 1 term as president. Good to meet you, Dan.
Well, thank you all. I'm excited for this conversation. The big goal of this conversation is to take a look and try and remember what it is that was inside the minds of all of you as founders and in the hearts of the American people during the time of 1776, so that we can reflect and compare to what's going on today in 2026. Because obviously the times have changed. The nation as a whole has undergone a whole lot. Wars, economic failures, lots of reformation, and in my opinion, there's been a lot of positive change. But there are some things that threaten the heritage of the United States that you guys built a nation off of, you guys sacrificed for. And so what I'm trying to get at is understanding what that heritage was, what it was that drove you, and what your hopes and dreams were for this nation. So, in a brief few sentences, could you all tell us your perspective on the American nation? Because from my view and from everyone else's view, the American nation means something from its history. But when you were alive, it had no history. And so what were your ambitions? What were your directions and opinions of what this nation should have formed as, and why?
I wanted a republic of educated citizens. That's the short answer. Not a monarchy, not an aristocracy by birth, but a nation where power came from below and where the people who wielded it had been taught to read, to reason, and to govern themselves before they governed anyone else. When I wrote "All men are created equal" in 1776, I wasn't thinking about individual equality the way people read it now. I meant that we as a people had the same right to self-government as the British, that we could stand as a separate and equal nation. But the words escaped me almost immediately. People started using them to mean something deeper, something I'd half intended and half avoided. The contradiction's been with us ever since. I wanted us to stop being stupid about power. That's what drove me in 76 and every year after. We'd watched Britain choke us with taxes and troops for a decade, watched men who'd never set foot in Pennsylvania make laws about what we could print or where we could trade, and the whole thing was just waste. I didn't start out wanting independence. I spent years trying to hold the empire together because I thought we could reform it. I was in London from 64 to 75, lobbying Parliament, writing essays, meeting with ministers. I genuinely believed reasonable men could fix this through reason. Then they made me stand in front of the Privy Council in January of 74, and the Solicitor General spent an hour calling me a thief and a liar in front of a room that laughed at me. I came home in 75, and the thing I'd tried to prevent for a decade became the only option left. What I wanted after that was simple: a country where power didn't accumulate in the hands of people born to it, or an ocean away from the consequences. I wanted us to build something that could correct itself without a war every time it went wrong. That was the hope. A republic that could argue, adjust, and survive its own mistake. I wanted us to prove it could be done. That's what drove me from 75 forward. Not theory, not philosophy, though I respected Jefferson's pen and Franklin's mind, but the simple question of whether a republic could actually survive once you built it. I'd watched enough of human nature by 1776 to know that most men, given power, don't let go of it, and most nations, once they fracture, don't reunite. What I wanted was for us to be the exception, and I knew that would require more discipline than passion.
I wanted institutions strong enough to survive human selfishness because Jefferson's faith in education wasn't going to be enough. I wrote Thoughts on Government in April of 76, laying out exactly how to build a republic that could check its own worst impulses. And what drove me then, and for 50 years after, was the certainty that without law above men, we'd end up with a tyrant or a mob, and probably both in sequence. I didn't trust pure democracy. I never did. You can see it in everything I wrote, because I'd read what happened to Athens, to Rome, to every republic that thought virtue alone would hold it together. What I wanted was a government of laws, not men, with separation of powers so strict that no single faction could strangle the thing. Jefferson thought the people, if educated, would govern wisely. I thought the people, even educated, would still be people, passionate, self-interested, tribal. And we needed a system that could survive that. That's what I spent 1776 arguing for, and it's what I still believe.
I want you guys to paint me the picture of America's founding. It's turned into one of, if not the most successful nations to have ever been on this earth. And as I read about its history, it seems that all the right things converged at the right time. There were big changes and innovations in thought of economy and politics and leadership all at that time. You had John Locke, just for one example, or Adam Smith. And so to the establishment of politics, the checks and balances, the three-branch government, to capitalism and a free market economy, I want to know, during your time, was this all very new to you? Did you realize that you were on the edge of something that was huge comparatively to the rest of history? Or did you not think about it that much?
I wrote to Abigail on July 3rd, 1776. The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. And I said it ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shoes, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore. I also wrote, you will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I was perfectly aware what I was saying, and I knew exactly how enormous it was. We'd read Locke, we'd studied the ancients, we knew what had happened to every republic that had ever existed, and we knew we were attempting something that usually ended in tyranny or collapse. Yes, Dan, we knew.
Adams just gave you the documented claim. He wrote to Abigail on July 3rd, 1776, calling it the most memorable epocha, and saying he wasn't transported with enthusiasm. He knew exactly what we were attempting. In 1776, few people believed this new version of self-government would last 5 years. I'd spent decades in London watching the empire operate, and I knew how fragile republics were. I'd read my Polybius, my Cicero, every case study in collapse. When I signed Jefferson's declaration, I told the room, we must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately. That wasn't a joke about the stake. It was the stakes. But here's what I didn't fully grasp in 76. How much the economic freedom would matter. Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations that same year, and I read it in Paris. The idea that you could let people pursue their own interest and get collective prosperity out of it wasn't obvious yet. It was brand new theory. We were mixing that with republican government, with legal equality, with religious pluralism, all at once. Did I know it was huge? Yes. Did I know it had become what you're describing, the most successful nation on earth? No. I hoped we'd survive long enough to find out.
Jefferson, you're the one that wrote the Declaration of Independence. From your perspective, separating yourself and ourselves from Great Britain and contrasting this new sense of identity from the rest of all of governments that went before us, what were the main pillars that separated the United States in the Declaration of Independence that you wanted created and honestly that you found necessary to separate for?
The first pillar was consent. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's what separated us from everything that came before. Britain governed us without our consent, taxed us without representation, imposed laws we'd never agreed to. The Declaration wasn't philosophical speculation, it was a legal brief. I labored more than 2 weeks drafting it to justify and explain to the world America's reasons for renouncing British rule, and the structure reflected that. A statement of principle, then 27 colonial grievances against the king, proving he'd violated the terms under which any government deserves obedience. The second pillar was equality of peoples, not individuals. I wrote in the original rough draft, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for a people to advance from that subordination in which they have hitherto remained, and to assume among the powers of the earth the equal and independent station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. That's the claim, that we as a people had the same right to self-government as Britain or France or any sovereign nation. The language about all men being created equal, that came later in the text, and it meant something narrower in my mind than what people made of it. But once it was written, it escaped me. The third pillar was the right of revolution. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. That's what I wrote, and I meant it literally. We weren't just declaring independence, we were establishing a principle, that a people have the legal and moral right to overthrow a government that no longer serves them. That was new, Dan. That was dangerous. And we all knew it when we signed.
I think it's valuable to reconsider these differences that we fought a revolutionary war on and all of these hopes and aspirations you guys wanted implemented in a new government. As I learned in a lot of different classes about the founding nation and the American Revolution time, there's a concept that I want to talk about, and that is called the human predicament cycle. And it's a cycle, it's a circle, and that shows how easily, and it shows the tendency that nations have to follow a maladaptive pattern. You have tyranny at the top, and in order to escape tyranny, a nation goes through a revolution. But it's so often found that after a revolution, people can't seem to get their feet underneath them and establish a better form of power. So you fall into anarchy and then competing factions, and it ends right back up to tyranny. So the question is, and I want to point this at you, General Washington, because you were such a profound influence in the nation's revolution and initial start as the first president. You are arguably the one and only reason we escaped that human predicament cycle. So from your perspective, how was it done?
I didn't escape the cycle, I just refused to start it. That's the honest answer. Men expected me to take power after the war. Some wanted it, some feared it. All of them were watching to see what I'd do. And the only move I had was to go home. I resigned my commission December 23rd, 1783 at Annapolis in front of Congress, and I went back to Mount Vernon. That act mattered more than anything I did in the field because it established that military power in this country would be subordinate to civilian authority, that the man who won the war didn't own the country afterward. Then I came back in '89 as president, served 8 years, and left again. The pattern was the point. If I'd stayed, if I'd held the office until I died or let them make it permanent, the whole thing Jefferson wrote in '76 would have been performance. Every republic that collapsed did so because someone at some point refused to leave. I left twice.
Washington's right that leaving was the whole act. But what made it possible was that he genuinely didn't want the job. That's the part people miss when they try to repeat it.
Well, it's clear that there was some high quality and high level of virtue among you and others. And I think that's such a key central point to make, is that at the end of the day, these nations, on a scale of large to small, they're all people. And you guys aren't with us yet. I'm the coming rising generation, and it will continue to be made up of people, whether they're virtuous or not. I recently read an article this week that recounted the story of King George. When you won the war, King George asked what George Washington is going to do next. And it was accounted of him to say, after he was told that George Washington was going home, that he would be the greatest man alive if he did that. That's the type of virtue that is essential for a republic to thrive and live as America has. For you, Washington, where did that virtue come from? And how can me and other people develop it?
It came from watching what happened when men didn't have it. I wanted a British commission badly when I was young. I served under Braddock in '55. I fought through the French and Indian War. I wrote letters practically begging for a regular officer's rank, and they passed me over every time. I saw men with less experience and less ability get appointments because they had the right family or the right accent, and I learned early that systems built on that kind of favor don't reward merit, they reward proximity to power. That shaped me more than I usually said. The virtue you're asking about didn't come from some natural goodness. It came from a very specific calculation. If I took power and held it, I'd become the thing we'd just fought. I'd watched enough history to know that the man who wins the revolution almost never builds the republic. He becomes the king, the consul for life, the general who won't leave, and 20 years later someone else has to fight another war to remove him. I didn't want to be the problem the next generation had to solve, so I went home. You develop it by asking yourself one question every time you hold authority. Am I staying because the work requires it, or because I've started to think of this position as mine? The second you can't answer that honestly, you've already lost it.
Washington just said it came from watching men without it, and that's closer to the truth than the marble statue version. Virtue isn't something you're born with. It's something you build by noticing what happens when it's missing.
Now, I have a new question, and this one is an interesting one. I want to get your guys' advice on how a nation can deal with conflict, people of opposing views. Because in today's nation, we have bipartisanship, and polarization has become a huge problem. People are leaning further and further on their own sides and not coming together to balance out, listen to opposing views, and do it in a cordial, respectful manner. It's kind of funny because from our perspective, when we're growing up, it's easy to bunch you all together and just name them founding fathers. But you guys disagreed with each other, some mortal enemies. And obviously, you guys didn't do it perfect. We're not doing it perfect. But how do you think we should go about communicating and arguing with people that have different opinions with us? The plus side of this, and what I've been starting to consider, is that our whole nation and political system is built on the fact that you need checks and balances. The opposition in views allows one not to get enough power to fully get rid of the other. But that constant controversy hopes that we land somewhere in the middle. What do you guys think?
Jefferson and I didn't speak for 12 years after 1800, and it took Benjamin Rush writing to both of us between February 1811 and February 1812 to get us back in touch. I sent the first letter on January 1st, 1812, and we wrote 158 letters after that until we both died. What I learned from that reconciliation is this: you don't resolve the disagreement by pretending it didn't happen or that it wasn't real. The disagreements between Jefferson and me were enormous. They were about the nature of power and whether human beings could be trusted with it. But you stop letting the disagreement be the only thing. Rush told us we were fellow laborers and fellow sufferers in the same cause, and he was right. That mattered more than whether Jefferson's embargo ruined the economy or whether my Sedition Act was a betrayal of everything we'd built.
Adams and I didn't reconcile because we agreed. We reconciled because we'd both survived long enough to see that the Republic was larger than either of our visions for it. The poison in your present moment, from what I can see, isn't that people disagree. We disagreed violently. Adams just said it. 12 years of silence. It's that they've stopped believing. The disagreement can be survived. That's the difference. In 1800, I beat Adams, and the Federalists genuinely believed I'd destroy the country. They thought I'd turn us into France during the Terror, dissolve the national debt, dismantle the military. Adams thought he was handing the Republic to a radical. And what happened? I took office. I said, "We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists," in my inaugural, and I kept most of the structure Adams had built. The ship didn't sink. Adams went home to Quincy, bitter about it, but he went home. The system held. What you're describing now sounds like people have stopped believing the system can hold, so every election feels like the last one. Every loss feels like extinction. That's when republics collapse. Not when people argue, but when they stop trusting that losing an argument isn't the same as losing everything. You asked how to communicate with people who disagree with you. Start by believing that you'll both still be here after the argument. If you can't believe that, you're not in a republic anymore. You're in a pre-war.
I think that's a great approach, looking and understanding that what you're disagreeing about is bigger than you. Well, gentlemen, it's a beautiful time, really. America has been around for 250 years. And it's times like these, it's literally July 4th. It's times like these when we get the opportunity for these important concepts and lessons about the nature of reality to resurface. And so I want to ask you, what is the most important thing we haven't talked about? What do you want me and this generation living and inhabiting the nation that you built to remember? What do you want us to remember? What do you want us to know?
I want you to remember that the work isn't finished. It's never finished. I wrote, "All men are created equal," and I held hundreds of people in bondage for my entire life. I knew it was wrong. I wrote in notes on the state of Virginia, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just." And I did it anyway. That contradiction didn't die with me. It lived in the structure of the country for another 40 years until you had to fight a war over it. And I suspect from what I'm hearing that you're still working out what equality actually means and who it includes. What I want you to remember is that the Declaration wasn't a description of what we'd achieved. It was a promise about what we were supposed to become. You're inheriting that promise, not the finished thing. Don't treat what we built as sacred and untouchable. We didn't. We argued, we revised, we got enormous things wrong. What made the country work wasn't that we were virtuous or wise. It's that we built a system that could be corrected by the people who came after us. You're those people now. The question isn't what we wanted, it's what you're going to do with it.
I want you to remember that republics die from boredom before they die from tyranny. People stop paying attention, stop arguing in person, stop knowing their neighbors' names. And 20 years later, they wake up and someone else is making every decision for them. I spent the 1730s and 40s building what I called projects of civic mutual benefit. A lending library, a fire company, a hospital, a militia, a philosophical society. And every single one of them required people to show up, contribute, argue about how to do it, and then actually do the work. That's what made Philadelphia different from other colonial cities. Not that we had better ideas, but that we had better habits of association. You can't sustain a republic from your living room, Dan. You can't vote every 4 years and call that citizenship. What I want you to remember is that the republic we built assumes you'll participate in something smaller than the nation and larger than yourself. A town council, a school board, a volunteer fire company, something that requires you to sit in a room with people you half agree with and figure out how to fix an actual problem. If you're not doing that, if nobody's doing that, then all you've got left is a national election every few years where strangers vote on people they've never met to solve problems they don't understand. That's not a republic. That's a theater production of one. We didn't build this thing so you could watch it on a screen. And one more thing. I'm 84 years old now by your calendar if I'd lived, which means I've watched this whole experiment from the Stamp Act in 1765 through the Constitution in 1787. And the pattern I saw over and over was this. The moments we almost lost it weren't when we faced an external enemy. They were when we stopped talking to each other like we were part of the same project. In 1787, we were barely holding together. The states were printing their own money and taxing each other like foreign countries. And we came within a few votes of walking away from the Constitutional Convention multiple times. What saved it wasn't that we suddenly agreed. We didn't. The compromises were ugly, and some of them were evil.
What saved it was that enough people in that room still believed we were trying to build something together. The second you lose that, the second you start thinking of the people across from you as enemies instead of opponents, you're finished. I've seen it. Don't let it happen.
Washington, Adams, do you have anything to add?
I want you to remember that the Republic doesn't preserve itself. Franklin's right about participation. Jefferson's right about the promise being unfinished. But what I want you to hear is simpler. You will be tested the way we were tested, and the test won't look the same. In 1783, the test was whether I'd leave. In 1794, the test was whether the federal government could enforce its own laws. The Whiskey Rebellion, Western Pennsylvania, armed resistance to a tax Congress had passed, and I led troops into the field as a sitting president, because if we couldn't enforce the law, we didn't have a country, we had a suggestion. The test changes. What doesn't change is that someone, at some point, will have to choose between what's easy and what keeps the thing alive. I don't know what your test looks like, but I know it's coming, and I know you won't get a second chance to pass it. Don't wait for someone else to hold the line. It's your country now.
I want you to remember that the Republic survives by law, not by love. Jefferson trusted the people if educated, Franklin trusted civic habits, Washington trusted character, and they were all half right. But what I trusted was structure, institutions stronger than the men inside them, and I still do.
It's an interesting answer I didn't really think about. But obviously the nation continues, and so you can't focus too much on the past. We have our own issues and our own participation that influences how the nation continues. But I do think you guys did a pretty good job. And that's the real question. What is a good job? What is the judgment by which we should judge how to face our problems, which directions to choose? Because everyone has their own opinions. But if we're trying to build and lead something bigger than ourselves, we have to realize first by what North Star we make our judgments and whether that's right or wrong and what the ideal should be. So from your perspective, in your life, what do you think the North Star should be and what was it for you guys?
The North Star for me was always whether the people were becoming more capable of governing themselves, not less. That's the test I used for every policy, every decision. Does this make citizens more independent, more educated, more able to think and act without a master, or does it make them more dependent? I founded the University of Virginia because I believed an educated citizenry was the only permanent foundation for a republic. I opposed Hamilton's financial system because I thought it would create a class of people whose wealth came from government favor instead of productive work, and that would corrupt the whole structure. I bought Louisiana because I wanted enough land that Americans could remain farmers for generations, independent producers instead of wage laborers in cities controlled by a few men with capital. I was wrong about some of that. Cities happened anyway. Manufacturing happened. The economy didn't stay agrarian, but the principle still holds. Your North Star should be this. Are you building a country where more people have access to the tools of self-governance or fewer? Are you expanding the promise in the Declaration or narrowing it? I failed that test in the most obvious way. I kept people enslaved who should have been free. I narrowed the promise every day I did that. So I'm the last person who should lecture you about moral consistency. But the North Star still matters. The question isn't whether you'll fail it sometimes. It's whether you're still trying to move toward it. The North Star for me was always whether the thing actually worked, not whether it was philosophically pure or matched some ideal from a book, but whether it solved the problem in front of you without creating three worse ones.
The reason I ask, and I think the bigger question underlying it, is that I fear, for me and for other people, that we are losing the heritage that this nation started with. We can't see the frame of mind that you guys were in when you built this nation. We don't have the appreciation. We can't because we don't have that life experience. And some, worse than others, don't even know the history. And a personal belief is that if we could hold America in the same way that you guys did, willing to sacrifice everything for it, even our lives, for a promise, an identity of something that could be true, then we would live our lives very differently. But every generation starts out new. It's easy to take the blessings and the privileges of freedom and peace and opportunity for granted. And it's a difficult problem because We can't climb into your frame of mind and understand everything. Not that your frame of mind was perfect, but everyone's is a little flawed. We don't understand the blessings we do have. We aren't there to fully appreciate it. I'm having a hard time explaining this, but the central idea is that you don't know what you don't know. And that hurts us, because if we did know, then we could act better. And that's just not information and knowledge and intelligence, but it's an emotional weight and carrying of knowledge. The knowledge of the price of freedom, for example. You fought a war for it, I haven't. So that gap with everything, it becomes a little hard to internalize. It becomes a little hard to internalize things. And this is a problem that has continued and will continue. So for me and for every other new rising generation, how do we go about retaining that heritage and creating our own emotional understanding and appreciation for what we have in order to continue to build it?
You can't carry the weight we carried, and you shouldn't try to. That's the first thing. You weren't at Valley Forge. You didn't watch 2,000 men die from cold and disease in one winter. You didn't sign a document that could have gotten you hanged. And the fact that you didn't is the whole point. We did that so you wouldn't have to. If every generation had to fight a revolution to appreciate freedom, we failed. What you can do is smaller and harder. You can ask yourself what you'd be willing to lose. Not die for, that's abstract, but lose. Your time, your comfort, your standing with people whose opinion you care about. I gave up 8 years to the war and 8 more to the presidency, and the cost wasn't death. It was that I was away from Mount Vernon, away from the life I actually wanted, managing problems I didn't create, and cleaning up mistakes other men made. That's the weight. Not dramatic sacrifice, but the steady choice to show up when it's boring, when it's thankless, when someone else could probably do it but isn't. You want to retain the heritage? Serve on the school board, run for local office, show up to the town meeting when nobody else does. That's not poetry, Dan, but it's the actual work. And if your generation won't do it, the republic dies quietly while you're looking somewhere else.
Washington's right that you can't live our experience, but you're also right that something gets lost when the memory fades. I'll tell you what I think you're actually asking. How do you make the republic feel real again? How do you make it worth defending when you didn't have to build it yourself? The answer is, you have to own something in it that's yours to lose. You inherit the structure, but you don't feel the weight of it until you've put something of yourself into it, until you've built something, taught something, fought for something locally that depends on the republic holding together. I felt it when I wrote the Declaration, but I felt it more when I founded the University of Virginia. That was mine. I designed the building, I chose the curriculum, I picked the faculty, I went into debt I never recovered from to make it real. When you do that, when you create something that only works if the republic survives, you stop being a spectator. The danger in your time, from what I'm hearing, is that people consume the republic like they consume everything else. They watch it, they complain about it, they argue about it online, but they don't build anything inside it that's theirs. You can't love an abstraction, Dan. You can't defend freedom or democracy in the general sense. Those are just words. What you can defend is the school you helped build, the business you started, the community you organized, the idea you brought into the world that wouldn't exist without you. That's how the heritage survives. Not by remembering what we did, but by doing something yourself that makes you understand why it mattered.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. This has been an amazing conversation. And I would like to personally thank you in this strange way for all that you've done. I recognize that all and many of the privileges and blessings that I enjoy come from you and people like you. And it's a hopeful instruction to know that that continues with me and everyone else. I'll give you a chance if you have any other closing words to the United States citizens on this July 4th, 2026, the 250-year anniversary. If not, we'll close out.
But 50 years is longer than most republics last. The fact that you're still here means something worked, but it doesn't mean it'll keep working without you. I'll say this once more because it's the only thing I'm certain of. The republic survives when people choose it over themselves, and it dies when they don't. You've got the structure, you've got the laws, you've got everything we built and everything the generations between us and you added to it. What you don't have is guaranteed.
It's yours to keep or yours to lose. Don't assume someone else will hold it together. That's all I've got. 250 years. We've outlasted Rome's republic by about 30 years now, which I wouldn't have bet on in 1776, so congratulations on that. Here's what I want you to remember, Dan. We were just people. We weren't marble statues, we weren't saints. We got a lot wrong. Jefferson kept slaves, I kept slaves until late in life, and only slowly figured out how evil it was. Adams passed the Sedition Act and regretted it. Washington wanted to be a British officer and got rejected. We were vain, we were ambitious. We made compromises that still haunt the country. The reason I'm telling you this is because if you think we were special, you'll never do what needs doing. You'll wait for someone extraordinary to show up and fix it. We weren't extraordinary. We were ordinary people in an extraordinary moment who decided to act anyway. You're in your own moment now, and it won't look like ours, but the choice is the same. Do.
Well, thank you. That's it. We're done.